You've probably heard the story of the golden calf, right? It's one of the most famous stories of rebellion in religious history. But here's the thing. At its very heart, there's a fascinating contradiction, kind of like a whodunit that spans centuries and scriptures. So let's dive into this.
So, the central question seems pretty simple, right? Who forged the golden calf? But the answer, well, it depends entirely on which sacred text you open. So, who was the artisan behind this legendary act of idolatry? And bam, there it is. The Torah points the finger directly at Aaron. Yep, Moses' own brother and the high priest. But then you look at the Quran, and it introduces a completely different character, a mysterious figure named As-Samiri. So we've got two texts, one story, and two totally different culprits. Let's break down how each version unfolds.
All right, first up, we're heading to the book of Exodus. So picture this. The scene is the foot of Mount Sinai. The air is still like electric from God just handing down the commandments. But the leader, Moses, he's gone. He's way up high on the mountain.
And he's been gone for 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days is a long time to wait in the middle of the desert. The Israelites, who were just freed from slavery, are starting to get gripped by fear and uncertainty. Their patience just snaps, and all that anxiety boils over into one big demand.
They turn to the guy who was left in charge, Aaron, and they put this immense pressure on him. Basically, they're saying they don't want to wait for an invisible God anymore. They want something tangible, a leader they can actually see.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at what Aaron does. He doesn't just give in, he orchestrates the whole thing. He's the one who gathers the gold, he forges the idol, and he even declares a holy feast, trying to somehow, fold this massive act of rebellion into a form of worship. It's wild.
But when Moses comes back down that mountain, absolutely furious and holding the shattered tablets, well, Aaron's leadership just crumbles. And his excuse? It's almost childish. He basically says, I just threw the gold in the fire and poof, there came out this calf. He completely avoids taking any responsibility, which really highlights how fallible he was under pressure.
Okay, now let's jump forward a few centuries. The Quranic narrative retells this exact same event, but with a critical twist. A totally new character is introduced. Aaron is still there, for sure, but he's not the one who forges the calf. Instead, this shadowy artisan steps out from the crowd.
And his name is As-Samiri. He's this really enigmatic figure who just kind of appears from the crowd to exploit the people's weakness. The source material even notes his name might be a historical nod to the Samaritans, which adds this whole other layer of intrigue. But his role here is crystal clear. He's the deceiver.
And this is where the story takes a seriously mystical turn. See, As-Samiri doesn't just melt down some gold. He introduces a supernatural element, something he claims to have seen that nobody else did. So when Moses confronts him, he confesses. He says he took dust from the path of an angel. Most people interpret that as the angel Gabriel. And he threw it into the molten gold. He claims this sacred dust gave the calf a semblance of life, that it actually made a lowing sound. So he didn't just create an idol, he created this bewitching counterfeit life form.
So for this incredible act of deception, his punishment isn't death. It's something way more chilling, a form of exile. He's cursed to wander, forever telling anyone who comes near him, "Touch me not." Just imagine that, a life of total isolation, a direct consequence of his arrogance. So when you put these two accounts right next to each other, the differences are just incredibly stark. And we're not talking minor details here. They fundamentally change the story's entire moral focus. Okay, let's walk through the key differences you see right here. The culprit shifts from a flawed leader, Aaron, to a malicious outsider, As-Samiri. The punishment? In the Torah, it falls on the entire community, but in the Quran, it's only on the individual deceiver. And this is the crucial takeaway. The whole moral of the story shifts completely, from a lesson on communal failure to a warning about individual deception.
And believe me, that communal failure had a brutal, staggering cost. In the Exodus story, Moses commands the faithful Levites to restore order, and 3,000 people die. Just wow. It's a really stark reminder of the weight of collective responsibility in this version of the story.
So you have to ask, why? Why these two very different versions? Well, this isn't just about spotting a contradiction. It's about understanding how these foundational stories can adapt over time to teach new lessons.
I just love this analogy from our source material. It perfectly captures the idea. The core event, the golden calf, that's the shared landscape. But as theology flows through time, kind of like a river, it carves different narrative paths. And each one of those paths shapes the moral and spiritual lessons for its audience. It's brilliant.
So ultimately, we're left with two powerful, really distinct warnings that show this theological evolution. The Torah's account, it's a stark lesson on communal sin. It forces a community to look inward at its own anxieties and at the failures of its leaders. But the Quran's version, by bringing in As-Samiri, completely shifts the focus. It becomes a lesson on individual deception. And you have to wonder why this shift might have happened, right? Well, by placing the blame on an outsider, the narrative also gets to exonerate Aaron, who is a revered prophet in Islam. It protects the integrity of that prophetic line. So you see? The same event retold to emphasize completely different theological priorities.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. Just by changing one character, swapping a high priest for a shadowy sorcerer, the entire framework of sin, guilt, and punishment is transformed. It really makes you wonder, what other stories that we think we know might hold totally different truths depending on who's telling them?